Murphy, a fuel instructor, and as you probably know, Ali Sweeney and Danielle Ribeiro both share the stage with me on Mindset Matters. Last week, our theme for this month is momentum and really building, going forward and building that momentum. It's critically important. And Ali talked last week about the power of decision, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about how I got here and the decisions I made over the past 38 years. And next week, Danielle will talk about the identity shift and what that's all about. So today, in the spirit of momentum and mindset, I want to take you back 38 years ago when I started my company. I left a corporate secure job and started a company from scratch. I started it with two other gentlemen, and both of them left within 6 months. So there's a first pivot. But I wrote a business plan, pretty detailed business plan. And here's the thing. Stop and imagine for a minute if fuel was in that business plan. And clearly the answer is no, because fuel didn't exist until only about 2 years ago. Were podcasts in that business plan? And the answer is nope. What about streaming live on YouTube? Nope, there was no YouTube. Actually, there was no internet available at that time. So when I wrote that business plan, I knew what I wanted to do for the most part, and I knew why it was important for me. I had no idea how. I thought I did, but here's the whole point of today's session is that if we wait till we think we have everything figured out, we never get any momentum at all. In fact, we might be stuck for years, for decades. So the whole idea is making decisions and moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean we're careless. There was an old saying back when I was getting started called ready, fire, aim. And get ready, but then you got to take a shot, all right? And you got to adjust as we go forward. I like to use the metaphor, if you will, of a GPS system. You know, when you're driving in your car and you take a wrong turn or something like that, as long as you know where you're going, your GPS is going to reroute you. And that's life, quite honestly. As long as we have a pretty clear vision of where we want to go and why it's important, the how shows up. So in my case, I wow, I got started and I tried to make sales as a 28-year-old consultant, and I was failing. That wasn't working. People were buying what I was trying to sell. And honestly, I didn't like selling. It just didn't work for me. So I started to think about, well, how do I get business? There's a how. How do I get business? And I noticed that law firms and insurance companies, companies like that, were offering free seminars to bring people in to educate them on changes in the law and things like that, and getting clients out of it. So I thought, well, why don't I try that? I'll create a workshop and invite people to come, and if they like what I have to teach, maybe they'll hire me. And so I did, and I got two clients out of my very first workshop, and one of them happened to be a bank and was willing to loan me money. So how about that, right? And the other one then went on to become Michigan Manufacturer of the Year like 3 years in a row. So what I was teaching was quite valuable. And so from those workshops, I was advised you should write a book. Well, I didn't know how to write a book. So I read a book about how to write a book. Again, back then there was no Google. There was, you read books and you listened to cassette tapes and things like that, audio tapes. And that was another part of my how that was critical, is that I was an avid learner. I was reading all kinds of books related to my subject matter. How do I be a better consultant? How do I be a better teacher? How do I be a better speaker? Okay. How do I handle interviews and things like that? And how do I write a book? And by the way, I made a lot of mistakes with that first book. So I went to a conference on publishing and learned about all those mistakes. Well, the one thing they couldn't explain is how did you sell out of these books? Because I mean, I didn't have barcodes on the covers, things like that. But from that book, I was advised to write a second book, an allegory, which is essentially a novel, a story, and take the teachings and build it into a story so you can really see how the teachings are applied through fictional characters. So I didn't know what an allegory was. So I I read about allegories. Then I read a couple of allegories to get the flavor. And I wrote my first allegory, my first of five. And wow, it made national news. And then a friend of mine said, John, you got to write the sequel. I do. So I wrote the sequel. And again, that made national newspapers. So all of a sudden, these hows came out of nowhere. In my original business plan, I had not written down any of this. Um, and so ever since, for 38 years now, I've been pivoting. So now you wonder, well, how did I get here on fuel? How did I become a fuel faculty member? Well, I was introduced to fuel by a friend of mine who started Successories and then Simple Truths. His name's Mac Anderson. Mac and I ended up writing two books together, in fact, and I wrote 8 books for Mac. And Mac introduced me to fuel. How did I meet Mac? Well, actually, my former mother-in-law met Mac on an airplane, and he was showing her in the airplane magazine, which they had at the time, successory ads. And she said, "Oh, that's really interesting. My son-in-law writes books like that." And so Mac and I made that connection. So one critical point in all of this is people and network. All right. Who do you know who could help you? And you don't even have to actually know them. They could be somebody, a book they wrote that you read. I recently saw John Maxwell speak. John is a world famous leadership coach, author, best-selling author. And he said something interesting that really resonated with me. Somebody had asked him in the past, they said, I want to do what you do. And John said, really? Well, if you want to do what I do, you have to be willing to do what I did. You have to be willing to do what I did. Now, that resonated with me because to be where I am right now, there was a lot of didding, so to speak. I had to do a lot. And I think back to a decision point for me. I actually saw another great speaker, best-selling author at the time named Tom Peters. And he was speaking to about 1,000 people, and I'm in the audience, and I was mesmerized by what he was saying. It was very impactful, and he was really challenging leaders and managers to step up. And I remember sitting there thinking, I want to do that. I don't know how, but I want to do that. And so the hows just started to show up. The what was important. I want to do that. Why? Because I want to reach people all over the world with a helpful message. I want to help people. And I want to teach. I want to teach, but I don't want to teach for a university. I don't want to teach for a school. I don't want to teach inside a box. That's just not what I want. But I want to teach. I want to help people learn. And so to learn, to help others learn, you have to be willing to learn. You have to learn everything you can to turn it around and share it. So this is the how part, because what happens is a lot of people, and I see this as a business consultant, I'll go in and the idea is we need to make improvements and we need to make them fast. We need to make changes. And one of the biggest excuses I see is we need to collect more data. Now, data collection is critical. You want to get data and set a baseline for where you're starting from in any change process. But you don't need that much. And if you start feeling like you've got to get all the data and figure out all the hows, figure out everything in advance, let me tell you something, you never build any momentum, because momentum comes from what I like to call micro goals, micro steps. And this is how that works. And I want you to think about this as part of today's contemplation more than a meditation. Contemplation is where we simply play with things in our minds without judgment. At Disney, they call this suspension of disbelief. We stop doubting ourselves. We stop disbelieving that we could ever do something big, and we contemplate it. Like what ifs? Like what if I do this? And why should I? And why shouldn't I? And who could help me? These are all the titles of chapters in my book, Zentrepreneur, Get Out of the Way and Lead. Starts out with what if? What if I make this change? Chapter 2, why do it? Chapter 3, why not do it? And then we get into the who and the how as we work forward. So when you're what, is important to you? And I help people identify their what by taking them back to their childhood and say, what really turned you on as a child? What were your moments of bliss, is a term I use. What were your moments of bliss? What, were you building something? Were you drawing pictures? Were you creative? All right. What were your gifts, natural gifts? Because when you give away those natural gifts, you feel good. And it's a very high consciousness, a very high vibrational consciousness. So when we are giving and we are receiving at the same time, because the more love we give the world, the more we feel love, the more joy we give the world, the more we feel joy. Whatever we give, we get. So if we're angry, and that's what we're putting out vibrationally, we're going to find more and more to be angry about. If we go through life with grief and we just can't let it go, all right, we just draw more grief in. That's law of attraction. So when we contemplate, we let all that go and we just roll things through our mind. We just play with it. And so one contemplative exercise is to think about certain key things that you want in life. I call those the dots, and then strategically connecting those dots. Now, that might not seem that powerful, but it is. So, for example, if one of your dots is you're good at mathematics, you're skilled at mathematics, and you like solving puzzles and problems, that's a dot. Another one is you're interested in language, different languages. Okay. Well, that's a dot. Another one is that you like playing piano, or you like playing music. You have a very musical interest in music. These are dots. Another one might be, I want to travel the world. I really want to travel the world and experience different cultures, different languages. I may or may not be playing the piano when I do that, but I could be. All right. And mathematics and piano and music have a lot in common. If you're familiar with music at all, it's very mathematical. So all of a sudden now we start playing with these dots and we start looking at ways to piece them together, and how starts showing up. So in my case, I grew up very creative kid, loved drawing pictures, even playing with etch-a-sketches, things like that. I liked playing and playing sports. So as I got older, I didn't want to work. I wanted to play. So how do you do that? And you'll notice that musicians don't work music, they play music. And athletes don't work basketball or golf, they play it. So I wanted to play for a job, for a living. And because I have a creative gift, I wanted to create my own job description. I didn't want anyone else telling me what I had to do. I didn't want to believe a 40-hour work week was required. I wanted to work on flexible hours long before that was even considered in most businesses. And I wanted to travel the world, and I wanted to help people all over the world, and I wanted to learn bits and pieces of other languages. So when I talk about connecting the dots, I'm talking about piecing all of these things together in your life. Okay. I wanted family, and I've got 4 great kids and 3 great grandkids now. But I didn't want to be working all the time and not being with them. I wanted to be home. So how do I work from home? And yes, I had to travel quite extensively for consulting work and giving speeches and things like that. But then I took a considerable amount of time off. I actually had what I called the 100-day policy, and that meant that I wouldn't be away more than 100 days a year. Now that sounds like a lot, but if you do the math, that means I'm home 265 days a year. And when I'm home, I'm coaching my kids in sports. I'm helping them with their homework. I wanted balance in my life. So the how is something we're continually trying to figure out without having all the answers. But as we accomplish these micro goals, and a micro goal can be right down to a daily goal. So if you value fitness, you want to feel energized and fit and young, a micro goal is being mindful of what you eat and mindful of what you do in terms of exercise and researching it. So what are best practices in exercise? And they are not what we are marketed in many cases. What are best practices in nutrition? And they are not what we are marketed. So we would want to be very mindful of what we're putting in our bodies and how we're using our bodies to stay fit. That's critical. And I have essentially been the same size as I was 38 years ago. same pant size, same shirt size, everything, 38 years. Why? Because I'm mindful of the inputs to get desirable outputs. I've talked about that in prior webinars, is the input process output diagram. So if I want to be intelligent and smart and helpful in that way, with people exercising the mind, um, what do I have to do to accomplish that in terms of a micro goal? Maybe it's read something new every day that is related to your vision. Not read something silly, but read something that actually moves you closer and closer and closer to your vision. Now, these micro goals, you can see it in sports. When you start gaining yardage, so to speak, you build momentum. And I was a competitive athlete, and in particular, football. Played a lot of different sports, but in football, you gain your when you gain yardage, and you can feel the energy shift in a game, and you're building momentum. That's a powerful energy. It's the same thing in life. When we start building momentum through baby steps, so to speak, not gigantic goals, things like that. The vision can be big and bold, but the micro steps. So at the end of the day, we're not saying, well, I didn't get my goals. Now, I didn't make $1 million. Okay. That's a negative failure mindset. But if at the end of the day, I could say, you know what? I made a couple of new sales calls. I made some connections with a few prospects. I might get a client out of it. I went to the gym. I got some exercise. I was mindful of my time and my work. I didn't waste a lot of time on unproductive things. I didn't confuse activity with productivity. There's a big difference. A lot of people are active and busy and busy, busy, and they're busy doing meaningless work, meaningless things. They're distracted from their vision. So when we're mindful of our vision and we're mindful of our tactical execution in the direction of that vision, wow, all kinds of things show up. And when they show up, they sometimes come out of nowhere. People just show up in your life, and you network, and you use that network. You help each other. I like to say, I help you, help me, help you. It's a dynamic. So if I can help me, help you, there's a deep connection there. And this is what I've made a business out of for the last 38 years. It's led me to this very podcast. All right. Because I wouldn't be here with you if I hadn't met Fuel, if I hadn't pitched a podcast. In fact, I have two podcasts with Fuel. I share this one with Allie and Danielle on Mindset Matters, and I have a Friday show called Fearless. Maybe you've checked that out, and if you haven't, check it out because I get some great guests. By the way, where do you suppose these guests came from? Vast network, just connecting with people. And so when I can bring on a world famous guest to share ideas on fearlessness, how'd that happen? How did I meet these people over the years? All right. When I started a long time ago, I was reading books by great people, Zig Ziglar, Anthony Robbins, Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, who was Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins' mentor, Jim Rohn, and General Norman Schwarzkopf, Storm and Norman. I not only read their books, I ended up on stage with them. I actually ended up on stage with Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, Norman Schwarzkopf. How did that happen? Did I put that in my original business plan? The answer is nope. At the time, I didn't even know who they were. I started to just read and learn, and then the next thing you know, I'm being introduced to these folks, and we're up on stage together. So I've had an amazing journey, but my point today with you is that very little of it was actually planned in detail. I had a vision. I took micro steps every day to move in the direction of that vision. I still have a massive vision moving forward. All right. I've set 100 million people as my target for right now. I want to help 100 million people. It's pretty bold. And do I know how exactly I'm going to get there? No, I don't. But here's a clue. If you're familiar with the AI bots at Fuel now, I'm one of them. And so what does that mean? It means you can interact with me 24/7 all over the world, every day, all day, with my bot, which is downloaded essentially with my entire body of work over almost 4 decades. Everything I've learned and shared, hundreds of interviews, hundreds of videos, 20 books, all of these have hundreds of articles have been downloaded. So my bot can answer questions you have for me, and that's available all over the world. And before we know it, these bots will be they already are capable of speaking multiple languages. So now I can teach all over the world without leaving my office, all right, and reach who knows how many people. And that's not that important to me. It's just a big number that I can focus on to draw in that level of energy, all right, that the power of that energy to accomplish that. And that's another thing is in order to do this, in order to get on the road without the how all figured out, then you have to have trust in yourself and in a higher power. You have to have faith because that's a powerful, very powerful energy. And even the simplest things, I was doing book tours back in the day, and I wanted to spend a lot of time, of course, with my family, as I mentioned. So what do? I buy a motorhome. I didn't know how to drive a motorhome, but I started doing book tours, taking my kids have been to 49 out of 50 states. All right, we visited most of the national parks while I was doing book tours. All right, that's a how, and I remember some people asking me, including my own children, like, where are we going to stay tonight? I said, in this bus. Well, yeah, but where are we going to park the bus? I said, I don't know. We'll see when we get there. That's pretty bold, but that's also having faith and trust in yourself and in a higher power and truly having an adventuresome life. And so if you try to figure all that out ahead of time, you never build any momentum. By the way, notice in sports, when the opposing team has got momentum, what does the coach do for the opposite team? They call timeout because they're trying to stop that energy, that flow, that power. So they call timeout. Before a kicker's going to kick a field goal, a lot of times they'll ice them, so to speak. They'll call timeout to see if they can get this kicker more nervous. All right, those are strategies to stop momentum, and for good reason, because they want to win the game. In life, we want momentum to be in a positive direction because incidentally, momentum can be in a negative direction where people just go right downhill. So we want positive momentum. I know former players that I played with, football with, went into the NFL, and those were their glory days. And I've talked to some of them recently, and it's their glory days are all behind them. They're going downhill in some cases. That's momentum you don't want. You always want to have a vision in front of you that is compelling, a reason to get up every day and move forward. So an exercise for you now is to stop just for a moment and contemplate. I'll give you a moment to just contemplate. What are the dots in my life? What are my gifts? What are my interests? Perhaps even hobbies? And how could I connect them so that I love getting up in the morning and doing whatever I do, and I'm building momentum. And from that vision that moves you, the root word of motivation is movement. It moves you, which builds momentum. What micro goals can I set? So contemplation is different than meditation, where we're trying to really slow, if not stop, our thinking and reflect in the silence between thought. Contemplation is using thought without any judgment to weigh things, to just weigh things, because we really don't know much. We really don't know much for certain. And I love quoting Socrates on this, who said, true wisdom is knowing that we know nothing. True wisdom is knowing that we know nothing. Now, this is one of the smartest philosophers in history saying, I don't really know much. All right. And when I think about that, and I get on the road, so to speak, without a detailed map. By the way, when I was taking my family around the country in the motorhome, there was no GPS. There was no satellite guidance systems. We got a big paper map with, and we're reading billboards. So it's the same. It's a metaphor really for the journey I've been on with my line of work. So take a moment now and just contemplate, where am I going? And how have some of the hows showed up in my life? People, advice, what some call synchronicity. It's like cosmic coincidence. You meet somebody happenstance and they just happen to have a helpful tip for you, or they introduce you to somebody. Um, Synchronicities, and the experts say that the more enlightened a person becomes, the more they witness these synchronicities happening all the time, every day. It's not a once in a while coincidence. You see it every day because you're more aware, you're more mindful, and mindset matters. So take a moment now and just think about what I've been talking about. What is it you want? Why is that important, not only for you, but for the world? How are you helping the world in some way with whatever it is you're doing? And how have I gotten to where I am right now? Incidentally, this includes mistakes we've made, and what we've learned from that. You gain wisdom from mistakes and from experience. That's different than knowledge. Wisdom is actually coming from actual experience. You grow wiser when you take risks, you take micro steps, you pursue your vision boldly, and you fall down from time to time, and you pivot, and your GPS reroutes you, so to speak. I'll finish with one more story, and this is in the year 2009. I wrote the book Beyond Doubt, which is now a Fuel course. Now, prior to that, I'd written, I don't know, 8 or 10 books, and they were all pretty much leadership and strategy and team building books, business books. And in the year 2000, I was halfway through a book, and my father got deathly ill and passed, and I just lost interest in writing. I stopped writing for 9 years. And now I'm doing an assignment over outside of Lyon, France. And the following week, I have an assignment up in England, in London. And so on a Saturday morning, I get up and I'm just going to go wander around, look at some cathedrals, practice my French, drink some cafe or whatever. But there was a very powerful presence that came into my room, an energy, very powerful. I call it presence with a capital P, and it said, John, you need to start writing again. And I said, no, I don't. I don't know what to write about. I'm busy. I don't. I resisted. I resisted that flow, what I call flow, and it wouldn't give up. It was very commanding presence. So finally, I just said, all right, Dad, or whoever you are, you want me to write? You have to tell me what to write. I don't know what to write about. I opened up my laptop and I essentially, I'll call it channeled Beyond Doubt, which went on to, in 2010, be awarded the most inspirational book of the year by a big critic in Toronto, Canada. And wow, that was a how I never saw coming. But it also shifted my focus somewhat, because it was at that point I followed that book with Sage Leadership, Zentrepreneur, and books that really started to integrate spiritual law and spiritual practice with modern day business challenges. Something very unique in the business space, in the consulting space. So these books are highly unique. And of course, with Fuel, they said, we'd like you to do a course on Beyond Doubt and the 4 steps to inner peace, which just quickly are let be present, be aware, take inventory, recognize how you're feeling, and if it isn't positive, let it go. Step 2 is let go. Let go of the baggage you're carrying around, let go of the grief, let go of the anger, let go of the ego, essentially. And when we let be and we let go, the next step is let see. Everything looks different to us. We have more confidence. We start building more momentum, more belief in ourselves and what we're doing. And when we get into that zone, we let flow, and we flow. And so when I'm writing a book, I'm in flow. When I'm giving a presentation, I'm in flow. All right. I get into flow for podcasts and interviews and things like that. How? Because I see it in a very positive way. I've let go of distractions and things weighing me down, and I'm present. Incidentally, this is not a linear process. It is an iterative process. So the more we do it, the better we get, the more flow we get into, we're building momentum. And if we continue to do it, if you take it 90 degrees this way, we ascend. We become more and more and more enlightened and awake and aware. So that's today's Mindset Matters. I urge you to think about just your what and your why and just start piecing together those dots and recognize that with true faith, the how will show up. Uh, if you like what you've heard here, I invite you to share it, please, and let other people know that this is helpful. And join me on Friday. This Friday, I have Gary Garfield, another synchronicity, if you will. Uh, Gary, I met a few years back exchanging books, manuscripts. He had just retired as the chairman and CEO of Bridgestone Americas. Bridgestone is the largest tire company in the world. And he's going to be my guest next week excuse me, this Friday on Fearless, because Gary faced two major challenges, let's just say. Um, before he became chairman and CEO, which he will share. But he also, when he retired, he's now a keynote speaker and an author. He wrote a book called Driving Results, which I read the manuscript and shared with him. And so Gary, again, there's a person that came out of kind of nowhere in my world, if you will, and likewise. We've helped each other. I've helped him, help me, help him, so to speak. So join me Friday with Fearless, and next week on Monday on Mindset Matters, Danielle will be talking about identity shifts. So join Danielle next week. That's it for today. I am very happy you joined me, and again, please share this if you will. And check out my AI bot on Fuel. It's pretty cool. You could ask it anything you want within my body of work, and